Welcome to this episode of Navigate. And today we have a special guest with us from across the pond in the cheery UK, Ruth Corkin, who is a principal of indirect taxes with her firm based in London area. So with that, I'm going to introduce Ruth, let her tell you a little bit about herself, her firm, and then we'll dive into some questions that we have for Ruth. So Ruth, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm a partner or principal in Hillier Hopkins LLP. We have 3 offices in the UK, all centred around not Oxford, London. My role is to deal with the indirect taxes, which are VAT, customs duty, plastic packaging tax, and all the environmental taxes that the UK is introducing. Post-Brexit, it's kept me exceedingly busy because everything that we used to buy from the EU now has to come across a border. So we have to do customs declarations and sort of advise clients on how to get their goods seamlessly into the country without too much hassle from HM Revenue and Customs. Not as easy as it sounds. So Hillier Hopkins is an accountancy firm, business advisors in the top 50 of the UK, so a fair size firm. And we do corporation tax, and I work closely with my corporation tax colleagues and personal income tax as well. But part of my brief is to look at the taxes in other countries as well. So not only do I have a very good knowledge of the UK indirect tax, I have a good working knowledge of indirect tax in the EU as well. So we're not that far out of the EU that we haven't yet got rid of all their laws. So I tend to advise a lot on cross-border as well as just purely UK.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that introduction. I encourage our listeners to go to our website at www.globaltaxfocus.com, and we'll have all of the contact details for Ruth, Hillier Hopkins, and her colleagues who will be joining us on future episodes. So let's get started with this whole concept of VAT. It is something that, from a U.S. perspective, when U.S. companies hear VAT, they think sales tax, but it's completely different. Do you mind giving us the lowdown on that?
Okay, so yes, it is a sales tax, but it's taxed at each stage along the supply chain until it gets to the end user or consumer. So individuals, not-for-profit organisations, some government bodies, some bodies that like hospitals and schools that can't actually recover VAT. They can never be VAT registered. So when I go and buy something in the shop, I will pay something inclusive of VAT, which is different to your sales tax, where you'll see, when I've been to the States, a price on the shelf and then the sales tax is added. But prior to that, if I'm a manufacturer, I charge my retailer VAT, they claim it back. They charge the consumer VAT, but they don't claim it back, and it gets paid to the UK government. And that's the overarching principle of VAT across the whole of the EU. So it is different to sales tax. It's only really sort of passed through businesses, and it's the consumer. I suppose you could call it a consumption tax. The consumer is the person who ultimately pays the VAT.
So when you're dealing with companies coming in either from the EU or the US, elsewhere in the world, what's the process for them to register for the VAT, and what is the most common misconceptions on their end as to why?
Okay, so if you import goods into the UK, so you're shipping them from the US and you're bringing them into the UK and you're the owner of the goods at that point, you have to register for VAT. It is what we call a taxable supply in the UK for which you're registered. So that's usually where you're delivering on delivered duty paid terms. So if you don't want to register in the UK, don't use DDP terms is the first thing when it's goods. There are certain services that will always be taxable in the UK, things like land-related services, exhibitions, conferences, hotel accommodation, all of that sort of thing. So there will be reasons why you will need to register for VAT. in a business term, for most business services, business to business, won't have a requirement to register. Your customer will account for the VAT. It's called a reverse charge. But by and large, if you are bringing goods into the UK, if you're installing goods in the UK, if you're doing anything relating to land and conferences, etc., you will have a requirement to register for that. And it is done online. That's the preferred method for both HM Revenue and Customs, our tax authority, and also taxpayers and agents. You can ask an agent to do it for you. And sometimes that's advisable because there are so many questions. Or you can actually set up an account with HMRC to submit your own registration. Just be warned, the application form is about 14 to 16 pages long. And if you answer one question incorrectly, it can cause all sorts of ramifications, which is why we normally say use an agent, because we know the form inside out. There will be other questionnaires that pop up as you register. So if you're doing land related services or financial services or anything like that, you will have additional questions to answer. Once the form's submitted, it takes HMRC up to 40 working days to process that application at the moment. So if you are thinking of trading in the UK, thinking of needing a registration, do it sooner rather than later, particularly if you're looking to import goods. They may come back with questions, further questions that you have to answer. They will then issue the number to you, the VAT registration number, which is, I've got to think about this, 9 digits long. And that is your unique VAT registration number in the UK. And that is how you identify yourself for VAT purposes on your invoice. You have to show your VAT number.
So is VAT charged on services performed by companies for individuals within the UK, or is it only if you're providing services in the UK?
If you're dealing with consumers in the UK and providing services, obviously they're not registered for VAT, and if they're not using it for business purposes, they will never be registered for VAT. So therefore, yes, you will need to register for VAT for any service you provide to those individuals. If they are, we do have a registration threshold here in the UK for UK resident people, and if they are trading, but they're under £85,000, they may not be registered. But if you provide them services and they use it in a business context, they will still need to apply the reverse charge, and that's added to whatever they do in the UK to get to that 85,000. So it can force registration in the UK. So it's important to know your customer, whether they're a consumer or a business, the type of service you're providing, and whether or not you have sufficient presence in the UK when you're providing those services. So if you have an employee, for instance, you could be deemed to have an establishment for VAT and need to register. So it is quite difficult to determine, that's the problem. But it's very fact specific, so you can't generalize. So if you're looking at trading in the UK, I would say come and speak to us and we can at least say yes or no whether you need to register or not.
And what about the e-commerce businesses, Amazon, others? If you're selling through those platforms into the UK, is there anything in particular we need to be aware of?
Yes, there's a specific set of rules for sales through marketplaces. So if the goods are located outside the UK but sold through a marketplace, the marketplace is responsible, and they're under £135, the marketplace is responsible for your VAT. So quite low value. If you have goods and you're doing something like Fulfilled by Amazon and they're in an Amazon warehouse in the UK, I'm having to think about this one. Amazon, I think, still deal with your tax. But if you don't sell via a marketplace, you have to register for VAT and sell to the consumer. So it is very fact dependent. It is very value dependent, and it depends on the location of the goods. So if they're over £135 and outside of the UK, then you become liable for the VAT even if you sell through a marketplace. which is slightly different, I think, to the rules in the US, and it is also slightly different to the rules in the EU. So if you're looking at selling goods into the UK to consumers, again, seek advice. And the rules do get tweaked and changed, and the thresholds get tweaked and changed. And your agent, if you're using one of the couriers, can get it wrong.
Well, one question that we often get is, if I register for the VAT in the UK, am I automatically required to register for a tax ID number?
No, no, not at all. The only times you would need to do that is if you have sufficient presence that you are physically trading in the UK. So again, coming back to employees who can conclude contracts, having offices with staff in them. If you do, then yes, you need a corporate tax identification number as well, which is called a unique trader reference, or UTR. And depending on what you're doing, you may need other registrations as well. So there are registrations for the construction industry, called the Construction Industry Scheme, which is to account for income tax on subcontractors and things. There are all sorts of other registrations that you might need if you're dealing in alcohol, if you're storing someone else's goods, that sort of thing. So there's a whole number of registrations that might go with it. But if you're not resident in the, you don't have a presence in the UK, then you're unlikely to need a corporate tax identity number. If you register the branch of a US entity in the UK with our Companies House, that changes it. And if you register a subsidiary, the subsidiary has its own identity separate to the US parent.
Okay. So once we get through the maze of, do I need to register, and what is the applicability of VAT on my supply chain and the services or products that I'm providing, the question comes down to, what does the compliance look like?
Okay, so we have a standard period of a quarter, so 3 months, and you can choose which quarter you want to use. So you can have January, February, March, and then you have June, September, December, or you can do February, March, April, or March, April, May, and so on. So you can tie that in with your year end if you want to, or you can keep it completely separate, depending on just how busy your year end could be, where you don't want to have to file a VAT return. If you are likely to be receiving money back from HMRC, so if you're in a startup phase, you can go to monthly VAT returns to get the money back a bit quicker. So that's often quite useful. And if you're very small, there is an annual accounting system where you do one VAT return, but you pay an amount each month. You have 1 month and 7 days, not working days, 7 days to file and pay your VAT liability. It's a simple return. There are only 9 boxes on the VAT return. And unless you're trading with the EU or via Northern Ireland, you will only ever fill in 7 of them. So it's not a difficult one to fill in, but knowing what goes where is sort of key to it, and understanding the VAT rules. If you file late, you will get a penalty, or you'll start racking up points actually. And then when you get to 3 or 4 points, you'll get £100 penalty. If you pay late, you will get interest immediately payable, and you will have a staggered penalty depending on how long after the return was due that you pay.
So what happens if someone just is trying to avoid the VAT system in every aspect? What happens when those individuals get caught?
Well, they usually get a hefty penalty. So how, I suppose we should ask the question, how would they get caught? Because, if you're a US company, how are you going to get caught in the UK? If you're dealing with consumers, then somebody is handling your goods or services at the time, particularly goods. And if you're trading through marketplaces, they have to declare details of all their sellers. So HMRC does have a lot of visibility over foreign companies and foreign businesses. It could be something as simple as an officer goes out and visits one of your customers, if you're B2B, and they see the supplies coming in and they see that your company isn't registered. And they will then start corresponding because they'll have the details on the invoice and things like that. And they will try and force the issue. And then it comes down to just how much leverage you have in a particular country. So in the EU, there is still a huge amount of information that is exchanged. And the UK tax authority can now say the German tax authority or whatever to come down heavy on a German trader. In the US, it's probably not so easy to do, but you're encouraged to be compliant, and Amazon and the like can block you from selling if you don't comply with the rules. So it's advisable to be VAT registered and stick to the rules. If you don't, you'll have late registration penalties. If it's considered to be fraudulent and you're deliberately avoiding it, company officers can be personally liable for penalties. It's not a nice regime to be in. So whilst I work on the principle of don't register unless you have to for most things, if you have to, please do.
So let's talk about this process, because I'd like to make sure that our viewers have a real understanding of the process and the advisory services that you would provide if they are looking to sell product into the UK. So US company, they reach out to you and say, okay, I've got widgets and I'm going to sell them in the UK, not through one of the marketplaces. What is the process in advising them, the whole process, so that they can walk away and go, got it?
Okay, so the process would be, first of all, looking at their actual supply chain. So who are you supplying in the UK? What terms are you supplying them on? Are you supplying them on delivered duty paid terms, in which case, yes, there's a registration requirement, or are you doing delivered at place, CIF, all of those terms which are internationally recognised? If it's anything other than delivered duty paid, your customer will be responsible for importing, accounting for duties, and then selling. But if you're going to hold inventory in the UK in a warehouse, then you've definitely got some form of presence in terms of the goods being there. And that's when you have to start looking at charging VAT, because you have to import them. You have import VAT to pay. You may have duties to pay depending on where those goods originate from. They may not originate from the States. You may have previously imported them into the States. So the original origin is also very important. And then by analysing all of that, we can determine whether or not you need to register for VAT in the UK. If it turns out you do, then my team are, we register overseas clients probably every day at some way, shape or form. We're used to the questions that HMRC ask. We've got a spreadsheet that does all the permutations so that we can get the information from you and then register you for, draft the form, send it to you for approval in case we've missed anything, and then we submit it. You need 2 forms of ID if you're not in the UK. No, 3 forms of ID, sorry. 1 photo, 2 proof of address, which is more than anti-money laundering requirements, by the way, here. And that gets uploaded into a secure portal, so it doesn't go through the post. I don't send anything through the post. And once it's used, it's then destroyed by HMRC. So the process from a registration point of view is quite easy. There's a lot of toing and froing, maybe asking questions, answering questions. From an engagement point of view, we would have to do a letter of engagement. We would have to do anti-money laundering checks. We would need ID for those, for those purposes as well. And depending on how the risk basis goes, we may have to redo that process every year, every 2 years, or whatever. But by and large, it's quite a smooth process. We've got it down to a T, I guess you'd say. And then it's down to you. In the UK, you can file your own VAT returns. As long as you've got software to do it, you can file directly. If you're not confident about doing that and the rules and things, then yes, we can do that for you as well. And we would set up your HMRC filing account, basic filing account, so that you have that there. It's just how you connect to that with your software to file your VAT returns. And all you file is the 7 to 9 boxes of the VAT return. There's no backing schedules or anything like that that go to the revenue. It's just a simple return.
Well, I think one of the things that you and I have discussed in the past is VAT could be just the start of many other issues in doing business in the UK. You could have a permanent establishment, you could have transfer pricing, you could have obviously the compliance, maybe even some human capital issues that arise. And a lot of times what we've discussed is VAT may be the primary item that a company is focused on, and they haven't taken the time to look at the overall picture. Do you mind describing Hiller Hopkins' overall service platform and tax to help people understand, do I have more than a VAT issue here?
Yes. So in the initial discussions that myself or my team would have, if we think there are other tax issues, we would flag them. I have a general knowledge of whether corporation tax, transfer pricing, PAYE, which is pay as you earn here, if you have employees, construction industry scheme. Then we have specialists within our team who would advise further on that. So I would stop out. I think you might have an issue. I'll get someone to talk to you, or one of my colleagues to talk to you. But by and large, if you're employing people in the UK, you have to have a payroll system, and you have to pay on their behalf their income tax and their national insurance, which is their access to our health service here, and our benefits system. You would need to set up a pension, because all employees are entitled to a workplace pension here in the UK. So that's possibly something different to the US. Some employees will have benefits such as private health and life insurance and company car and things like that. They all have tax implications. So some of them are called benefits in kind, i.e. they're treated as additional salary to the value of, particularly things like company cars and private health insurance. There are rules around taking your staff out for dinner or having a Christmas party or anything like that. So how we aim to work in Hiller Hopkins is that we aim to work holistically, so that if I find that you have some form of establishment for VAT, I would speak to my corporate tax colleagues to say they may have a permanent establishment for corporate tax here. We need to speak to them. If there are goods coming into the country, or you're marking up a cost plus centre or things like that, we would consider transfer pricing and the correlation between the two. If it's in construction, we would look at the construction industry scheme. If you're looking to own property in a corporate body, we would look at the annual envelope of dwellings, ATED. Annual tax on enveloped dwellings, it's called. It's a tax on corporately held buildings in terms of residential dwellings. So there's so many different things. Again, coming back to importing, although I do customs and duty and VAT, I would look at your environmental responsibilities. So Europe and the UK are looking at a cross-border adjustment mechanism for iron and steel, ceramics, pesticide, those sorts of things, the heavy carbon intensive industries. So they're coming into fruition. Disposal of packaging, labeling rules. So it all ties up, and we try and do one holistic service so that you're not having to go to too many people and have too many contacts and manage it through that process. You may only ever speak to me once on VAT, but you may speak more with my corporate tax colleagues, or vice versa. So I get my tax colleagues come to me and say, I think my client's got an issue, and equally I go the other way.
Yeah, I can attest to working with Ruth and her colleagues with many U.S. companies looking to go to the UK, and I can tell you the experience was very, very seamless. That the clients, U.S. clients, would come back and say, that was very comprehensive. They did start with the supply chain and went through the entire transaction streams to make sure that uh, they understood what we were doing. They made suggestions of where we could tweak things to help us be more efficient. And more importantly, make sure that if there were taxes to be paid, registrations to be filed, that it was done in an efficient, effective manner, and most of all, timely. So I can tell all of our listeners that if you or anyone has business in the UK or you're contemplating doing business in the UK, I highly recommend that you reach out to the Hiller Hopkins team. Start with Ruth. Ruth is being very, very modest. I'm going to make her share this with us. Ruth, now you do some advisory. You're on a committee with HMRC. Is that correct?
I sit on quite a few committees with HMRC actually, so I have the privilege of having advised the government here in the UK on VAT. In two guises. I did a report, or part of a report, on simplifying the VAT system. Don't hold your breath. It hasn't come to anything too much at the moment. It's a very slow process. And I also sat on an advisory body for the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is now the Windsor Framework, etc., etc., and changed again this week. So there we go. There is progress there. But I did used to sit on a committee where we used to raise issues directly with HMRC policy teams. I've stepped back a bit from that. I still have access to it, and I still have some very good contacts there that I can access personally because I've built up the friendships and the relationships. But I do sit on some of the regulatory body committees about VAT, so the Institute of Chartered Accountants, the Institute of Tax, and I do sit on some of the groups for customs duty with HMRC, and also land and property and financial services. So I've still got quite a wide-ranging remit. I contribute via the International VAT Association for anything to do with UK VAT, where there's EU initiatives going on, and it does keep me in the loop for the EU VAT, because most people think we're out of the EU, we don't need to worry. So it's been really, really useful, because those contacts there mean that if your registration, for instance, gets stuck, I can free it up usually. No guarantees, because one day somebody will say to me, I'm not going to do that. But usually, just by going to the contact I have there and saying what's going on, you get it moving.
So it just reinforces it's not necessarily what you know, but who you know in
Yes.
certain situations, right? So it's always nice to have those individuals that you can reach out to, have a sidebar conversation, and see if they can help move along something. Because as you and I both know, many times it's a box that was checked incorrectly, or
Yes.
someone misinterpreted what was written on an application, etc. So it's always good to have someone. And I can likewise tell my listeners, I use Ruth when I'm looking at things in the UK. I mean, not just the UK, but in Europe. She does have that vast knowledge of European VAT and is able to pinpoint what the issue may be, and even better, who to reach out to in Europe so that you're not bouncing around all over the place. We really appreciate, Ruth, you being with us today. Is there anything else that you want to make sure you leave with our listeners?
There is actually, because even if you don't need to register for VAT, but you're sending staff across, maybe, looking at markets in the UK before you even start, those employees will incur VAT on their hotel costs, their food costs, some of their travel costs, etc., etc. They may even be buying a few laptop consumables or whatever. As an American business, you can claim back that VAT. You can fill in a separate form called a 13th directive claim. You get up to 5 claims a year. You need a certificate from the IRS to say you're in business. That might be the most difficult part of the claim, to be fair. You send in your invoices. I think you can now send in PDF copies. And HMRC look at it and say, yes, you can have it back. No, you can't. And they will repay it if they think it's due. They will ask quite a few questions, don't get me wrong. Why were you here? What was the purpose of the visit? Who came across? You know, what sort of things you've incurred. But by and large, they are very good at repaying. And the same goes in the EU as well. There's very few EU countries that would not refund to the US, even though the US has no VAT system and no way of reciprocating. There are a few countries where reciprocity is important. So Italy is one, Romania is another that I'm aware of. But by and large, a lot of them do refund to US companies. So if you have a lot of globally mobile employees, don't think that VAT is lost. It's worth making a claim. So that's something that people don't realize.
Perfect. Well, again, we really appreciate you coming on today. We will have some of your tax colleagues that you mentioned. We'll have them on as well. And maybe we can get you to get a couple of your clients together and we can ask them some questions or answer some questions for them regarding doing business in the United States, because the bond between our two countries is very, very strong, and there's a lot of business going on between us. So again, I encourage everyone, all of our listeners, to reach out to Ruth. I have found her to be a tremendous resource over the past couple years, and she will make sure you get the right answer. And until our next adventure, we wish you a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.